This is Rough Drafts Welcome,
the podcast where you can mess up, and we can too.
I'm Sachiko.
And I'm Erin.
And together with the editors at Salt and Sage Books,
we're changing the face of storytelling, one rough draft at a time.
We're glad you're here. Let's get started.
All right, so as we were talking about why representation is so important, I would love it if you would tell some of the stories about the name things that have happened with your kids, because I know you well, and you too. I mean, I don't mean to be like, tell us your children's stories, but whatever you want to share. You just have better stories here than I do, so rock on.
You have some good ones too.
I do have some good ones, but I would much rather, let's start with you. I would rather start with you.
All right, so my name is Sachiko, everyone. That is Sachiko. I have, because I've grown up with Japanese, it seems easy to me, Sachiko. It is very challenging for a lot of people where English is their first language. And one of the places where it's been very difficult has been writing conferences. And Erin will remember that one of the writing conferences that I've gone to with her.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't immediately start laughing, but oh man. Here we go. Let's do it.
Look, you have to laugh so you don't cry. You don't have to. I like to. I prefer to laugh.
I'll growl. How about that?
I'm also allowed to cry about it because sometimes it's upsetting.
I mean, sometimes it is. People have said really hurtful things. They really have.
Very hurtful things. Well, that's the thing is I can give people a list of do's and don'ts. Like, don't ask about this. Don't do this. And it's easy to say, don't get somebody's name wrong. But, it's not just as easy as saying don't get somebody's name wrong. I'm okay when people get my name wrong. What I don't like is when somebody tells me that my name is wrong.
Makes me so incandescently furious.
Right? I don't need anybody to pronounce it correctly. I don't want to be told I'm pronouncing it incorrectly or that I am incorrect as a human by having a Japanese name around them. And I'm sure to the beautiful people out there listening and watching who are saying that happens, it happens so often. Guys, the last time it happened was just a few weeks ago, and I'm 43, and people will do it right in your face, out in front of God and everybody. So at this writing conference, I took my name tag out of my lanyard, and I wrote above the Sachiko, I tried to create a phonetic pronunciation guide with a SAW, SAW, dash, CHEE, dash, KOH, Sachiko. Mm-hmm. And I always lifted it up, and people would say, okay, how do you say your name? Sachiko. Sachiko? Sachiko. Sachiko? That's fine. It's okay. A lot of people can't stop themselves from saying Sachiko or Sachiko. That's okay. You're trying. It's okay. Some people wouldn't be okay. I am.
Well, and I want to point out too that it's not that people are necessarily doing it on purpose to be unkind. Sometimes it really is a phonetic, they've never, I remember first time, when we were very first talking about this, when we very first met, and you were explaining to me, where the emphasis is on your name, English doesn't have a ton of, the emphasis is different in English. We have different, syllabic patterns. So, I don't think that people are necessarily, when they're asking, and they're being kind, and I feel safe making this point because you've said it to me before, but that I don't think that they're doing it to be unkind on purpose. I think some of it is just plain ignorance, and that's fine. It's fine to not know. It's fine to ask. But what's not fine is that then what comes after.
So it's fine, everybody, if English is our first language, and it is for most of us, what we've internalized are rules around pronunciation where foreign words tend to be pronounced on the second syllable. Sachiko. Mm-hmm. We've learned that from a lot of foreign languages that English has borrowed heavily from. That's okay. People apply what they know. They apply what they know, and it's okay to get somebody's name wrong. But here's what was not okay, was when people would say, well, I can't ever say that name, and they would get upset. They were defensive, they were angry, they were offended.
I've heard people ask you, can I just call you something else?
Oh, yes.
No? This is her name. You don't get to just like pick a different name for her. No, that's.
Somebody who spent 20 minutes telling me how impossible my name is and how funny it is and how silly it is when they try to pronounce it, the ridiculous things that would come out of their mouth. What a joke my name is. I was asked by somebody a few months ago, can't she just call me Tamagotchi? So,
like
guys,
like the toy.
Like the toy.
Yeah. Like we know that word.
Yes.
Blech.
Yes. So,
if you're on audio and you cannot see my face, like the stank face is strong.
So, yes, people can be rude about it. And here's the next point is that it means that whenever I introduce myself, I have a split-second kind of sweaty moment where I'm like, okay, do I tell them what my friends call me? Or do I give them, like, my government name?
Yeah.
Where I can because if they look like somebody who can't handle it, and a lot of people can't, so many people can't. So many people are wonderful, and they tell me my name is beautiful. But I am surprised by which people are not willing to be around a non-American name. Yeah. Unwilling and angry about it.
Yeah.
So,
it's the same people who are over here pronouncing Tchaikovsky just fine.
I know, right? Darlings, if we can pronounce Tchaikovsky, we can pronounce Sachiko.
Honestly. So I was a teacher in a past life. I mean, not like literally in a past life. I was a teacher.
She's been reincarnated.
Before I had my kids, I taught English and I taught French, and I loved it so much and I miss it immensely. But one of the things that happened at the beginning of every year is that, you have these students come in and you don't know them. And most of the time you've never met them. And the kids who I had were ninth graders too. And so it was their first year in this big new school. And bless them. Gosh, I miss teaching so much. Okay. I loved my students. I still do. I feel so fondly about them.
They were lucky to have you.
One of the things that I tried really hard to do in the beginning was, to own what my biases were. So that very first day of school, I'm like, okay, we're going to do like the super awkward roll call thing. And this is your chance to tell me what you want me to call you. Because the only thing that I got from the particular school that I was teaching at, and schools nowadays might be different, and that's fine. But in my experience, they just basically gave you the printout of names, and it was everyone's legal name. And so, you'd have kids who were like, Charles is my father. Please call me CJ, or, whatever it happened to be. So I was like, but I tried really hard to preface it with like, I am going to believe you when you tell me what your name is. And I'm going to call you that for the whole school year. So if I say it incorrectly, I like desperately need you to correct me, please. And I need to know what you want. I want to know what your name is. Like, please help me call you the correct name. And I think for many of the students, it's that same feeling that you were just describing, where they have this moment where they're like, ooh, I don't know if I believe you.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's easy to do lip service. And it's a lot harder to mean it.
Instant risk assessment, because there is a social cost to having an ethnic name. Yep.
Mm-hmm. And this is partly why...
privileged ethnicity.
Sorry, say that again?
Even a relatively privileged ethnicity like Japanese.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. Like, and so in one of those... okay, hang on. Let me refine what I was... This is... First of all, I think this is why it's so important. If you can externally display your allyship, that those sort of indicators become really, really important. So if you can wear, like on my teacher lanyard, if I had like a pride flag, or if I had a Black Lives Matter pin, or a Stop Asian Hate, or anything along those lines, those sorts of things indicate safety. And they indicate that you're the sort of, hopefully they indicate that you're the sort of person that would follow through and that you act in a way that you believe. I think that I know there's a lot of conversation about it right now. There was a school district in Utah that has banned pride flags. Like, you can't have flags of any sort in your classroom. You can't have Black Lives Matter flags. You can't have pride flags. You can't. And that breaks my heart, because you are taking a group of students who are already marginalized, and they know they're marginalized, and you're removing the ability of anyone to signal safety to them. And that creates a culture of, okay, tell me if I'm saying this wrong, homogeneity. We're
going to look this up.
Sameness. It creates, I know how to spell it. It creates a culture of sameness that is, and not in a nice way. It creates this culture where you're afraid to say what your name is. So rewind back to the story where I was, I'm going through the name of students, right? And there was this one particular student whose name, and so I was in Idaho too, and so some of the names like were spelled creatively.
Oh yes, there are.
I mean, there are whole articles you can find of like fancy Idaho names that are just.
I want to create one for a name site. Anyway, yeah, there's a naming practice among people in Utah and Idaho. A lot of them are Mormon, some of them aren't. Which somehow the Mormonism I just had a brain fart.
Oh, well, I was just going to say it's probably important for people to know that we were both raised in Mormonism. So,
yes,
like we're using the term Mormon very intentionally here.
Yeah, that's a self-descriptor.
Yeah.
That is part of our shared experience.
I'm sure we'll talk about this at length.
Oh, because that's a huge...
It informs everything. But keep going.
Of experience. But it informs name use too. There's a lot of non-traditional creative baby naming.
Mm-hmm. Well, and part of it is because you, in the Mormon tradition, it is common to have large family members, like a large amount of children. And so, and you don't necessarily want your kid to be one of 7 Justins in the first grade, and so you give your children. I understand it. I understand like the impetus behind it. Doesn't mean I can't also find it a little funny because some of the spellings are just like, you know, that TikTok sound. Everyone's so creative. Like everyone's a little creative. But anyway, so it was one of those names that, and I looked at it and I was like, okay, hang on, this is going to be a tricky one for me. And so I did my best. And I asked the student, how did I do? And I'm not going to tell you the name on purpose because this is her story. And if she wants to share it, then it's hers. I don't want to unintentionally drag anyone's name through anything that they didn't consent to. But, so I pronounced her name. I was like, okay, is this correct? And she goes, yeah, that's pretty good. And I have since learned, at the time I was like 22, I didn't know. I have since learned that when someone says, that's pretty good, or I like the way you say it, or ooh, that's pretty, that means you got it wrong. And they're trying to be really gentle about it. I didn't know that at the time. And I mean, and to be fair, I had told them, like, I'm just going to believe you. So if you tell me it's good, I'm going to believe you. Like, I don't have time as a teacher. I had like 38 kids in a classroom or something. I was like, I just don't have time to be able to like mind read you. So like, I really need you to just be honest with me. But so I went through the first half of the year calling her by that name pronounced in the way that I had pronounced it, that I didn't know was wrong. And then it was after winter break, we came back and I heard, just, you know, as I was getting ready, as the kids were coming in, she and a friend were talking about what they had done over the winter break. And her friend said her name. And she said her name differently than I had been saying her name. And I had this moment of just like, just, I felt so embarrassed and I felt a little bit ashamed too. Even though I was like, well, hang on, I did ask. Like, I can still say like I did what I knew how to do at the time. And that truly was my best. But that still somehow she had not felt comfortable to correct me. And I had been naming her incorrectly this entire time, which means that every time I had called on her, every time I had said her name, every time I had complimented her, there was this little teeny tiny twinge inside of her of, oh yeah, but that's not actually my name. And I felt so sad that she had not felt comfortable to correct me. And I want to be clear, she was in 9th grade. This was not her job to correct me, but it made me feel this sense of like how crucial it is. And I'm white. My ancestry is Norwegian and Swedish and British. And like I am Northern Hemisphere white person. But it made me feel so keenly how important it is for me to take on a lot of responsibility in making sure that I really ask. And that
right.
I'm not asking just for fun. Like, I'm asking because I really want to know. And I know that for a lot of people, they feel very uncomfortable about that.
Right, because, I mean, as a Sachiko in a sea of Jennifers, it means when people have said, well, you need to tell me, even when it's really kindly meant, what I have often heard, especially if I haven't been feeling great in that moment, is it's your job to always show up ready to pick a fight.
Yes.
It's your job to challenge authority figures who can punish you. It's your job to put yourself into some kind of social risky situation, some kind of danger, however minute, just so you can just be yourself and have your name and be existing around us. So, and so people, how do we bridge the gap between someone who just wants people to be able to use their names and people who have names that they just want to use? What is the best thing somebody can ask?
I mean, that's such a good question. I think I'll give you my answer and then you tell me how I'm wrong. I'm very happy with this setup. Yes. I think, first of all, it's important to be sincere about it, especially as someone who comes from, I heard this phrase the other day and I love it, someone who comes from the global minority as a white person. That I exist in the global minority. But as a white person who in the United States, where you and I both live, I have an outsized amount of privilege. And privilege that I'm probably fairly unaware of a lot of the time. And so for me, like, if I go to Starbucks and they're like, what's your name? And I'm like, it's Erin. If they even spell my name wrong on my cup, like my name is Erin, but they spell it Aaron, I feel hurt. Like, it feels invalidating to me. As I mean, we can get into the whole gendered aspect of it too, but like, I remember the very first time that happened, I felt so wounded, where I was like, but I'm not a boy. Like, that's not who I am. And that was just the spelling. They were still pronouncing it correctly. But I felt so wounded by that as a little kid. And I mean, I think we've all had an experience like that. But I think the sincerity of it is something that you can be really honest about.
I think Starbucks, when it comes to naming, Starbucks is the great equalizer of experience, I believe, because they are just as likely to get anybody's name wrong.
It's the Phteven. It's this Phteven thing. The Phteven, where it's P-H-T.
Phteven?
Phteven.
Phteven, is that you?
If y'all don't know that meme, then you're too young to be listening to this podcast.
Include the meme, the classic meme in our show notes. You know what? Starbucks is one of those places, like, the way I have managed the risk and the constant little bit of tension about my name is I have mentally separated things into my government name, which is my first given name, and then the name I give to my friends and that I use professionally, which is Sachiko. And that is my middle name. It is my legal middle name. My father named me after his aunt from Nagoya, who had a pachinko parlor. And when she heard that Rei-chan had named his baby daughter after her, she cracked up, because the ladies on that side of my family are hilarious and sassy. So I love using my name at Starbucks, because one of the first times I ever used my name where I live, and I live in a place with very few Japanese Americans, I used it at Starbucks. I showed up for my order and they said, "Oh, Sachiko, yeah."
Like, they know you.
They noticed my name and they had set it aside. And I was like, "Oh, you said it right. Oh my gosh, I feel so special." And guys, I probably drink more Starbucks from there than I should, just because I love that little automatic validation of having them know my name.
Yeah.
And they say it, and it just feels so good. There was another moment of validation. Well, first let me tell you the stories that will illustrate why I wanted this validation so much, why I'm so attention seeking about this. Okay.
You're not attention seeking. You just want to exist.
I do.
In a validated way. I don't think that's attention seeking.
Well, and I've been raising my kids I have 7 kids. I have homeschooled for years. They're in public school now. Half of them are adults. I can't believe I'm a grandmother. I'm not actually a grandmother, but I'm old. I'm 43. It's not old. It's fine.
It's not.
It's fine. I'm 43. It's fine. So One of my children, when I took him to school, he has a Japanese first name, and they called me. The office called me to come and pick him up because my 5-year-old, who was at his first day of kindergarten, was in trouble in the office. And I got there, and this tiny 5-year-old boy was curled up on a chair crying. And guys, if you knew this kid, and I won't tell you his name because he hasn't consented to being in the podcast other than just as one of my kids. He is a rule follower. He cares deeply about authority. He cares so deeply about doing things right. This could not have devastated him more.
Yeah, it really broke his heart. It really broke his heart.
It broke his heart, and he didn't want to go back to school after this, and I don't blame him, because what had happened is he got to school, he got to the roll call, and the office lady and teacher said, that is not a real name. That is not a real name. Folks, that happened after the year 2000. So that was very hard for him. And then there was an incident a few years ago where I took one of my daughters, also with a Japanese name, in to get a medical procedure done. And the person who was running the machine, like, this is a professional, a tech. He has gone to school. He looked at the paperwork and said, Psh, that's not a real name. And I said, yeah, it's Japanese. And he's like, that's not Japanese. And then he looked at us and went, you're not Japanese. And you guys,
and Aaron burst out of the wall and rained fire upon him. Oh my. Ugh.
And it wasn't just that this happened, and this happened when we needed medical care. We just needed a procedure done. I was taking care of a medical issue for my child who wasn't feeling well. Wasn't a great moment. But it was the fact that this was a moment that had followed 100 other moments like it over the years. 200, 500, who knows how many. And this moment was important because something inside me just went, and I went, that's the last time that ever happens. And I think he saw the fight on my face, and he immediately backpedaled, and he went, I've never met a Japanese person. I've lived here all my life. Which, thank you. That was sincere. That feels like that's a good explanation. It's not, it doesn't excuse it, but it does explain it. Yeah. He had never met a Japanese person. He had no idea what the state of the Japanese American community is, that there were people from the Japanese American community living in our little sort of weirdly rural nuclear reservation, small town / collection of small towns that I live in Eastern Washington. Yeah. So he had no idea how to treat a person with a Japanese name. So when I took my kids, because I'm still connected to the Japanese American community, so I take my kids to Portland or Spokane or Seattle for Matsuri. We do the festivals, we do Bonodori in the summer, and I took them to Bon at Oregon Buddhist Temple, and I love them very, very much. And we went to the rummage sale, and I found some stuff I wanted in the basement rummage sale, and I asked them to hold it for me until after Bon was over and we were going to drive back home. And she said, what's your name? And I said, Sachiko, and that was it. That was it. There was no explanation. There was no fight. Sometimes it's a 15-minute fight. I am not exaggerating. Yeah. That people don't want to, it's just a name, guys. Like, it's just a name. But it's more than a name. This is who I am. Yep. And just to be so accepted and to feel like I belonged, it felt like I have been, like I'm always conducting a tug of war where I live. And it was like the rope just suddenly, like the resistance disappeared and I just fell on my butt and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so happy. Just that feeling of, I am not weird. I am not the only one. And so I'm always chasing that now. Like when I try to find representation in movies and in books, and when people ask me as a sensitivity reader to help them with better representation for Japanese Americans in their stories, like I want to give people that feeling of just falling on their butt in recognition of, oh my gosh, like this is me. I exist. I'm being respected. People care about me. I get to exist in a story. This is me. I loved it. It was amazing. I was high the whole drive home after that. I think everybody needs to have that moment. Everybody needs to have that feeling of seeing themselves in a story.
I think that, speaking as a white person, I knew like that racism was a problem But until I really started understanding what a microaggression was,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really understand, and I'm not at all trying to say like I magically understand what it's like to be Japanese American. I don't. I have no clue. You've been incredibly gracious in sharing so much of it with me that I do know more now than I did. But I didn't understand how much it was part of just a daily chipping away of who you, not like of your right to be a human, like your right to even exist. That it's not just like you describe having someone just know your and write your name and having it not be a big deal. Like that happened to me all day, every day. It wasn't a thing. It isn't a thing for me because I have an Irish name. And it's more, I don't know. You know what I'm trying to say. Like it exists as it's a quote unquote real name, if you will.
There isn't as much resistance to you using it because it's a common, commonly
no
used name.
I think the other part that's important to highlight is that you especially live in a space where, and the political climate is such, where you genuinely have to decide sometimes between, do I want to be validated and exist as a human? Do I want to insist that they say my name correctly? Or do I want to use the name that is mine? Or do I want to risk, like literally risk my life? Because I know there are people where you live, and I know you've run into them before, where you're in a doctor's office or whatever, and there are people with loaded guns and that are very racist, and they're overtly very racist. So in like to insist on your name being your name, even at like the front desk of a doctor's office, becomes it could really potentially become a super, super dangerous situation.
Let me explain, everybody. Those of you out there, because I've had this conversation, this experience so many times before, my head is already replaying some of it. And in that replay, I am hearing a lot of people say, that's an overreaction. Let me explain. Okay, where I live was where they made the bomb that the U.S. dropped on Nagasaki. There was I'm near Richland, Washington. Okay, and this is where the Manhattan Project got. Like, this is where they processed a lot of the fuel. And that's still a huge part of the heritage here. Like, the heritage here has essentially not moved on since 1950.
Yeah.
There is a local high school where the mascot is the Richland Bombers. Like, they are, and it's not a picture of it's a picture of the mushroom cloud over Nagasaki, you guys. That is on the high school. So there is still a lot of... I don't know if we
can, like, underline how horrific that is. Like, that is so horrifying.
But it's very normal here. So what is normal for where I live is in World War II, all the Japanese American families in Eastern Washington were rounded up. Okay, so they took them from here, Yakima, Spokane. A lot of them didn't come back. I don't blame them.
I mean, a lot of their shops and their homes were sold off or destroyed or looted or burned or all of the above. They had nothing to come back to.
So the reason that my kids and I are growing up without a local Japanese American community is because it was literally taken away a few generations ago. So it was artificially removed. And plus you have that this town that I live in is paid for. I mean, this is basically a federal company town. Mm-hmm. And most people are paid really well to manage all the contamination, the radioactive contamination left over from processing the fuel for your weapons. So there's a lot of people who are still carrying a lot of feelings from World War II. That's still alive here.
I've been really, really shocked by your stories where people have said like, oh yeah, the bombs were justified.
Yeah, those Japanese, you Japanese deserved it. Or my grandpa won't look at Japanese people because of the war. Or I always learned that Japanese people were XYZ. That's still alive here. Yeah. That's still alive.
Even. It's not even it's not even an underground thing like you need to get 4 drinks in to get someone to talk about it. Like it's
just regular folks. Yeah. It's just regular folks that I meet when I go to the fabric store.
And they say it to your face too.
Oh, right to my face, right. So here's a story about names. Here's a story about names in this area of the country. When I had one of my children and I gave him a Japanese name, you know how you have to sit in a wheelchair to be pushed out of the hospital? So my kid's dad was getting the car, we're divorced now. But my kid's dad was getting in the car, and there was a nice old gentleman volunteer who was pushing my wheelchair to the elevator, downstairs, out to the front. And he asks me very conversationally, "Oh, what did you name your beautiful baby?" And I told him, and he immediately was mad. Like, I guess this guy was a vet, which, full disclosure, you guys, I mean, my dad's a vet. I've grown up as a military dependent. This is not, it's not about necessarily being in the military. It's just some people went into the military and came back out and kept hating some people. And it's not a requirement to be in the military. Like, I know this. Some people just really, they hang on to it. This guy was angry at me. Why the hell did you give your baby that name? And so, I mean, my baby's 1 day old. I'm a happy mom. He's pushing my wheelchair. Like, I am depending on him to push my wheelchair. And I'm holding my baby, and he's angry. Like, that was a scary moment. That wasn't very comfortable. And I don't think he necessarily would have pushed me down a flight of stairs.
But the anger, I mean, you immediately then don't know.
The hostility is just, I mean, and when I have people who keep saying, you know, I think it was right that we killed the Japanese, and these are the same people who have also said, I've never met a Japanese person, and that's very common here, which means when people are looking at my kids and they see that they are part Japanese, you know, that they're Japanese, I'm not going to say part, I really hate the whole blood quantum thing, but that we are part of the Japanese American community. I don't want people looking at my kids and thinking, it's really good that we killed your people. It's really good that we killed your family.
So dehumanizing.
So I'm really passionate about doing the work of peace, that if we can help people to see that my kids and I are like regular people and don't necessarily deserve to be bombed, maybe, that
What a radical idea.
Right. I just hope that if it ever comes down to that again, that if they try to take me and my kids away, which, by the way, according to the standards set by the U.S. government of who was going to be incarcerated in internment camps, my kids and I absolutely would have been taken away. So to anybody who says I don't qualify as Japanese American, the U.S. government already decided that I do.
I qualified for your harassment and your abuse. Doesn't that qualify me? Like,
my grandchildren are going to have sufficient blood quantum to have been considered a danger to the United States, so we're good. I would hope that people would look at us and go, those are people. Japanese people are people too. We don't need to bomb them or jail them.
I think that hate, generally speaking, for any group, in order to hate a group, requires you to mentally homogenize the group. And in order to... in order to justify a war against an entire country of people or an entire religion of people or whatever it happens to be, in order to justify any sort of groupthink around that, in order to get really patriotic people who to be willing to fight for their country or, you know, whatever it happens to be, fight for their religion, fight for their political person of choice, a lot of what is required is that mental homogenization. And when you take a group of people that have one similar trait and you smash them into one group, you necessarily lose all humanity within that group. And that's when you start to get stereotypes, that this is where people have just been homogenized across the board.
Right.
But then the thing I have found to be really important about sensitivity reading and about individual books and individual stories that individual people have written is that you have the ability to, as an author or a creator or an artist or whatever it happens to be, to really, really humanize somebody. And like in the story where you're writing, if you have a character who is named Sachiko, they're real. They're real. They exist. They are a person. And you get to say, as an author, not only are they a person, but they're important and they have feelings and they do fit with their culture, but they are also a unique individual. And it is a lot harder to hate individuals than it is to hate a group. And I think like that's by design. That's by design. It's a form of control. It's a tactic to maintain power. Is if you can make people hate a group, then you have control over them.
Yes, and I think, that's where it's still working in my in my town, people are still afraid of Japanese people, even historical Japanese people, and so they're saying, I don't hate them, but I need to engage in self-defense. It's hard. It's harder to harm somebody when you really know their story and you see the common humanity.
Yep. Yep.
I mean, we've all heard umpteen after school specials that basically, but it's a point that we need. It's why we keep repeating it, because this is how our human brains work. We work by creating connections with each other.
Yeah. Well, and that's the whole point of story, is that story takes all of those connections and weaves them together into something that makes meaning for you. Mm-hmm. And if you have a story that says, like, for example, the people in your hometown have that story that says that Japanese people are a threat, because that's the story that they were given in order to get them to do the things that the government needed them to do. And right. I want to be clear, I'm not an anarchist. I'm just looking at, like, the power dynamics that happen. And to get someone to agree with you, you have to remove their ability to doubt. And that's what homogenization and dehumanization of a group does. But when you have that sort of a story that exists in a place, it often can just go unquestioned until you have someone who butts up against it and is like, well, hang on, actually. And it puts, as we've discussed, can put marginalized people in genuine life-threatening danger to do that, right. To insist on their name or insist, actually, she is Japanese. Actually, that's not okay. It can be genuinely life-threatening. And whereas a book or a TV show or a podcast or whatever it happens to be can move into that same space and create inroads that literally would not exist otherwise, simply because right. of the insulation of some really small communities. The diversity doesn't exist there. And it becomes like that again, it's the Ouroboros again, where they're insular because of the racism, but the racism keeps them insular. And that's
a really interesting part of, because Erin and I, we've both spent a lot of time in the Intermountain West. Mm-hmm. That's where Erin grew up. I went to high school there. My parents are from there. And Japan. But there are a lot of communities where it was very deliberately made white. Yeah. We have a lot of communities where it was deliberately white. But now we've reached a point, a few generations later, where it isn't necessarily deliberately white, but it still has that heritage.
It's like traditionally white.
It's traditionally white, which is almost worse, because nobody has to even continue to feel the vitriol. It's just a very passive situation where then becoming non-white and going into that space is seen as a disruption. It's seen as uncivil. I have been that rude person in those places before. And I think that a lot of people really feel caught on their back foot when they have to figure out, why is it that they feel... Why do they feel defensive? Why are they feeling like I'm being aggressive by just standing there existing and saying my name is Sachiko? Yeah. And having books and movies, and I mean, a lot of Japanese American women will roll their eyes about the sexualization of women, especially in manga. But manga alone has done more to say, hey, Japan exists and Japanese American people exist. Maybe an incorrect idea, but at least the idea that people are allowed to exist as Japanese in a lot of these places. And the stories are doing a lot of heavy lifting. So if you out there are a creator who would like to put diversity into your story, you have an opportunity to connect with so many people, to connect with your natural audience if you have a diverse character or a diverse setting. And to connect with other people and to just help facilitate this idea of it's okay to be different.
Yeah.
We're different in the story, and the story works. You can have differences in your story too.
Yeah. And I think another thing that is, for me, a pretty straightforward thing to do as an author is to include a pronunciation guide.
Oh, yes.
And to do it in every single book. Even if you have characters who do not have what you would consider an unusual name, or an ethnic, whatever you want to call it, include a pronunciation guide always, because then you are underlining the message that it is important for people's names to be pronounced correctly. Even if your name is Mary, and it's like the most common name. I don't know if Mary's the most common name.
Well, it's normalizing using pronouns. Like, I want to say I am she, her, because somebody who might need to be a they, them, I want them to know they're not the only person who has to introduce their pronouns.
It's a way to signal. Where you stand.
Right. Here's how to introduce your difference in a safe way that's going to be supported.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, you're fabulous. I love talking to you.
I love talking to you too. I think we may have magically reached a natural close to the conversation. Isn't that wild? We never do.
Wow.
That. We'll have to talk at some point and have you talk about how you name your characters, because you have Sachiko is like the queen of all things names. That when I'm like, I need to name a character, help, she's like, oh, I got you. It's a special interest. It's magical is what it is. You're so skilled at it.
Thanks. This has been Rough Drafts Welcome.
Thank you so much for listening.
Got any questions? We would love to hear them. Got a complaint? We'll hear it too.
Yep. Leave us a 5-star review. Pretty please, and thank you. And if you want to book with Salt and Sage Books or learn anything else about what we do, or if you want to work with us or take our courses or blah, 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 you can find us at www.saltandsagebooks.com, and we're all over social media too.
We sure are.
And we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.